Well, thank you, Hannah, and I'd just like to echo that really warm welcome to everyone to the University of Glasgow. If you haven't been here before, and especially warm welcome to you. My name is Richard. About 25 years ago, I was in a similar place to you. I was coming into a university for the very first time to listen to a lecture. So I hope you find today useful. I hope that you gain some experience of what it might be like to be at university, and who knows, some of you interested in geoscience, in geography, and in the earth or environmental sciences, this might give you a little bit of flavour to some of the topics that we might discuss in class, and equally some of the topics that we're pursuing research upon within the university at the moment. I did a geography undergraduate degree for 3 years south of the border in England. I went on to undertake a master's in science of the environment, and then I worked in consultancy in industry for about 4 years before coming back to my career in academia by studying again for a doctorate degree, looking at river science. And I think Hannah mentioned earlier, I'm a river scientist. I'm interested in the interaction between water, between sediment, and also what I'll be talking mostly about right now, vegetation or wood, and how that shapes our Earth's surface. Why are mountains of a particular height? Why do I get different patterns of rivers? Why do we get different magnitudes and frequencies of floods occurring in different places, and what harm does that cause? There are lots of really exciting questions that are relevant, directly relevant to society, that lots of us in the School of Geographical and Earth Sciences are working on here in Glasgow. And through my talk today, I'm going to spend a little bit of time introducing some terms, geomorphology and riverscapes, nature-based solutions, and rewilding. Then I'm going to just briefly introduce why we should care about the role of wood in rivers. And for me, as I've explored different rivers, both here in the UK and elsewhere in the world, it's become increasingly striking to me that one really crucial ingredient is missing from many of our rivers here in the UK, and that is wood. Our rivers are typically quite depleted of organic material, and we're going to explore why that matters. And in particular, we're going to be travelling up north to what I think is one of the most stunning valleys, one of the most stunning landscapes here in Scotland, to Glen Feshie, where I actually undertook my undergraduate dissertation in the early 2000s. It's a landscape that I've been revisiting with my research over almost 2 decades, and I've watched this landscape really change. And I want to talk to you about some of that change and what that might mean for the shape of the Earth's surface. And I want to introduce what one of our master's students is doing to try and measure some of that landscape change and think about what it means for our rivers. And then I'm going to wrap up quite broadly. I'm going to just talk about why I think rivers should be considered as natural infrastructure. And I'm going to think about what diets a healthy river actually needs. For ourselves to stay healthy, we need to eat a healthy diet. And I'm going to introduce some of my ideas about what a healthy diet should be for a sustainable river. So geomorphology, pop your hand up if you're familiar with what geomorphology means. Got a few hands there, which is great. Let me unpack this term a little bit more. So geomorphology comes from a Greek derivation, ge for earth, morph for form, and logos for discourse. Geomorphology is about the study of the Earth's surface. Why all of the different landforms, they might be glacial, they might be coastal, they might be fluvial or river landforms, why they are the shape that they are, and what processes cause them to have that three-dimensional topography, that particular shape, and how are they changing? How have they changed in the past, and how might they change into the future? And we might do that by monitoring them, or Todd, our head of school, is just at the back there. Todd does a lot of computational modelling and a lot of work to date landforms, to understand when in the past those landforms were last altered or created. I tend to work in my research over the last 10 to 100 years in timescales, and I'm interested in quite contemporary processes in how the landscape has been formed. So through my talk over the next half hour, I'll be mentioning a number of times probably this word geomorphology. And we teach a number of courses that touch upon both fluvial, coastal, hill slope, volcanic geomorphology, for example. The next term I use quite a bit is the term riverscapes. And I used to think of rivers as the ribbon of blue water that may be snakes in a meandering path across a valley bottom, or it might be that the river is multi-thread. I've done quite a bit of work in New Zealand and the Philippines, and quite a lot of the rivers there, like Glenfeshie up north that we'll be talking about, have multiple threads. They carry an awful lot of sediment through the river network. But increasingly, I think of rivers not just as those blue ribbons of water, particularly at low flow, but also a river to be a riverscape, to encompass all of the space from one side of the valley slopes to the other side of the valley slopes, right across the valley bottom. And we're about halfway through the UN decade on ecosystem restoration, and a lot of restoration work is in line with that thinking. We're not just thinking about restoring and managing the wet part of the river, we're thinking about how the whole of the riverscape functions. The river and its floodplain, the tributaries that feed sediment into a river potentially. And Foch, a researcher, said a riverscape is a continuous view of a river. It's needed to understand how processes interact among scales, set in the context of stream fishes and their habitat. If we want to understand a particular problem, it might be that a river's eroding quite rapidly at one particular place. It might be that we have a flood problem. It might be that we have degraded habitat in a particular reach. We need to think about what's happening to the river upstream. We need to think about catchment management. We need to think about what's happening across the whole of that valley floor. We need to think about what potentially is happening downstream as well. If we're close to the coast, how is sea level changing, for example? We need to think about our riverscapes as a continuous view, both spatially and temporally. So you might find me using that term, riverscape, a few times through my lecture. I've got a colleague I spent time with out at Utah State University, Joe Wheaton, and he's produced this graphic to show what a riverscape means. Utah's pretty dry, and ecosystem engineers, or beavers, have been introduced into many rivers in Utah, and they've re-wetted valley bottoms. And you can see that as those valley bottoms are wetted, and we're looking at the valley sides indicated in these green dashed lines on the left-hand side there, and on the right-hand side there, that's where the toe of the hill slopes or the terraces is touching this valley floor, this riverscape. We then get this incredible complexity of both vegetation and water, and these sediment stores, which we call these river bars, forming this really rich mosaic across the valley floor. And it's these messy rivers, these quite messy landscapes that can provide both flood resilience and ecosystem service for society, but also provide lots of different niche habitats for aquatic organisms. I might also talk about nature-based solutions. What does the UN Environmental Programme define nature-based solutions as? Actions that protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural and modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously benefiting people and nature. You might have heard the terms river restoration. River restoration in the USA is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Some of our graduates go on to work on river restoration or river management for organisations like the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, for consultancies, for non-governmental organisations as well. And right now, nature-based solutions are really going through a big boom, both to address challenges with the frequency and magnitude of flooding, but also to address both our biodiversity and our land degradation crises. And the term that was in the title for this talk, rewilding, is part of those nature-based solutions. Rewilding can be quite a contentious term, and it's something that you might explore a little bit more this afternoon. Some research undertaken by the Scottish Government, a report that you can read, defining rewilding for Scotland's public sector, came up with a Scottish relevant term for rewilding. It means enabling nature's recovery, whilst reflecting and respecting Scotland's society and heritage to achieve more resilient and autonomous ecosystems. And you might want to think about this term rewilding when I start to talk about the river and Glen Feshie. To what extent are the ecosystems becoming more resilient? Are there benefits to society as well as nature? Most of what I'll be talking about is from the geomorphic perspective. I won't spend quite as much time on that societal perspective, but I think there's some really interesting debates around rewilding for Scotland's society and its heritage, and that's something that geographers inherently often focus their thoughts around. So I want you just to look at this picture for a moment, to get your eye into the landscape. Where's the river? What shape is that river? Is it straight? Is it meandering? Is it single thread? Is it multi-thread? Does it have lots of habitat complexity like that slide we saw from that river in Utah, or is it relatively simple? What creatures can we see on the valley bottom? What animals are grazing over what type of land cover? How's that mosaic of different land uses organized? Are there fences to restrict movement of animals? Or are animals able to move across the landscape? What types of properties are there? Are they derelict? Are they in use? If we start to look into the mountains, what's the land use on those mountains? What type of forestry cover do we have? Are they organized plantations, or are they natural woodlands? I use that term natural quite broadly. How's the moorland managed? Is it for grouse shooting, or are we getting regeneration of native species? This landscape that we're looking at is relatively manufactured by man. All of our landscapes are manufactured across much of the world now. The majority of the Earth's surface is impacted in some form by human activities, but most of the land covers here have been manufactured or modified or shaped by mankind. If we came to Scotland 5,000, 10,000 years ago, we'd have seen our land cover would have been very different. And Scotland Big Picture is an organisation that very much advocates for rewilding. There are, of course, critiques to some forms of rewilding and what that might mean, but here's a cartoon of their vision for landscapes through 20, 30 years ahead from now, through to 2044, as you can see on the date there. Just think about how that rewilded landscape has changed and been reconceptualized from what it is at present. The previously straight river through the valley bottom has been given space. And that's actually caused a change in the river style from a straightened channel to a multi-thread channel. Most importantly, we can see that the vegetation cover, both on the valley bottom and also on the valley sides, up into the hills, has completely changed. The river, the tributary that was, I think, blocked previously, is now reconnected to the valley sides, and there's a change in the life across the valley floor and the valley sides as well. We also see some change in some of the buildings, whereas before we had a derelict building here, this is maybe being converted into holiday accommodation or other purposes. So visions of rewilding in their most ambitious form can show quite substantive changes in land use. And clearly this is an upland example where there's considerable space to actually re-envisage what land covers could be. So what's most striking to me in those cartoons of what a rewilded landscape might look like is how the riverscape and the amount of wood within that catchment has changed. And if we look at rivers with wood, we can see how wood might be distributed within those rivers. On the top left-hand side there, we can see, I think, a European alpine river, a multi-thread river. We can see some trunks, some clumps of wood deposited on those river bars. Those interact with river flow, and they can create particular habitats. On the bottom right here, we see a slightly narrower valley, and we can see some of those tree trunks actually connected directly to where the water is flowing, creating particular habitat niches. On the bottom left there, I think drawn from a picture in Canada there, we can see in a really, really forested catchment a huge amount of wood coming down during flood events and actually creating a woody dam. We very rarely see pictures of rivers like this in the UK. Most of our catchments don't have a lot of wood, a lot of Christmas trees actually in those upper catchment reaches, and that means that we're missing part of what can give our rivers structure for habitat diversity and a range of other functions. So the next few slides are going to give some conceptual models. I'm not going to spend too much time on the detail, but I just want to highlight a few things that we can do as researchers, and students might even think about in projects that they might undertake in their third or fourth years at a university like Glasgow. One thing is wood as a budget. Actually understanding how much wood moves through a landscape. I think one of the really exciting natural experiments that's happening here in Scotland right now is the reintroduction of beavers. In some places that's quite controlled. In other places, beavers very much are escaping and from some of their enclosures and creating their own habitats. They're creating dams. They're lifting the water table locally. They're really changing the way that rivers configure themselves in some places by creating those dams and also revitalizing woodland, which often has reached a particular age along our river corridors, and the removal of older trees and the regrowth of younger trees is really changing that dynamics along our riparian corridors. So wood might be delivered to a river from a log jam, like we saw, from a debris flow, where lots of sediment moves almost like rolling as a landslide down a river. They might be reintroduced discreetly from a little patch of bank erosion on the sides of a river. Wood might start to grow in vegetated islands, in really large multi-thread systems. We might actually see wood starting to recolonize areas that were formerly gravel bars. That might then feed back into making those features more permanent within the river scape. Why do we care about wood? Why is wood potentially important to us? I mentioned earlier about this feedback between the ecology of a river and wood. Wood might directly provide a food source through leaves and the organic material that's actually introduced into a river. It might also cause creatures to actually fall into a river and provide a food source for aquatic organisms that live within the river column themselves. One of the most important things, though, is that it creates diversity of depth and velocity. So the introduction of a large bit of wood, a tree trunk, might cause a deeper area to be eroded in the lee, immediately downstream of that tree trunk, where the river was previously of quite a consistent depth and velocity. So it creates this complexity, and lots of fish at different life stages need different combinations of deep and shallow and fast and slow-moving water. So wood can introduce that complexity into the riverscape. So there are lots of reasons why wood can enhance the ecological diversity of a river. Wood can also potentially provide a flood risk management service by holding back water during high flows, by slowing down the flow of water through a river system. So here in Scotland, I mentioned one experiment with beavers. We've also got another really big natural experiment underway concerning wood and landscape change. If we travel up to the Cairngorms National Park, and we've got Aviemore or Canusie just here, Aviemore just slightly further to the northeast there. If we go to the eastern side here, all of this area that's shaded in green is the Cairngorms Connect area. And Cairngorms Connect is an organisation that's bringing together landowners to create a landscape scale experiment of reforesting and rewilding a whole swath of what at present is fairly bare, or was fairly bare, mountain scapes. And predominantly by managing deer numbers quite aggressively, and also replanting trees. The valley sides, the valley floors of this whole swath of the Cairngorms are changing quite rapidly. Over the 20 years that I've been visiting this landscape, I've seen real change. So Cairngorms Connect, here's some facts and figures since 2019. So we're just looking over a 5-year timescale here. Non-native conifers have been removed from over 8,000 hectares of land. A whole series of volunteering and staff opportunities have been created. One of the debates around rewilding is often if you change those grouse management and those deer stalking jobs, what does that mean for the local community? Most estates are actually creating jobs as a result of changing the way they manage the land. Deer management across the entire area, 60,000 hectares is being actively managed. And deer numbers have now dropped down to about 1 deer per kilometre squared, I believe, in somewhere like Glen Feshie, which is a really low number historically. Of course, deer don't have any predators. There's no lynx or wolves anymore here in Scotland. So man is the only way that we can really keep those deer numbers in check. Why do I focus on deer? Why does Cairngorms Connect focus on deer so much? Deer eat plants, they eat small trees. As soon as a sapling gets much more than a few inches high, if deer numbers are high, that will be nibbled away, and we end up with a relatively relic forest where we've got old trees that are already established, but none of the young trees are becoming re-establishing themselves. Who's ever shopped in Assos? Anyone used Assos to buy any clothes? Some of you might have visited somewhere like Assos. The owner of Assos, who's a billionaire, is one of the largest landowners in Scotland, Polvson. Polvson owns Glen Feshie and also owns 5 or 6 other estates. These are not small estates, they're the whole of a river catchment. They're hundreds and in total thousands of kilometres squared of land. And Polvson has really responsible for this enormous rewilding experiment in Glen Feshie and a number of other estates. And when he bought Feshie almost 20 years ago, really changed the business model for Glen Feshie, which previously was dependent upon deer and grouse shooting, and deer numbers were relatively high. In the early 2000s, in 1 year, I think 5,000 deer were shot in Glen Feshie. So the population was brought right the way down. Now, this is This photo was taken in 2004 by me hiking up a mountain and using a zoom lens. It's a little bit blurry, but what I just want to draw attention to is we've got this multi-thread, this braided river at low flow. So you see the blue is the low flow channels. We've then got these islands. Almost all of these islands are composed of heather or grass, or they're bare. There's very few smaller trees. We've got some large established trees, but very few smaller trees. If we go forward 20 years to 2024, this rewilded riverscape now features trees that are 5 or 6 meters high, right across the sides of the active channel, and also on many of these islands. I realize this photo zoomed in a little bit further, but hopefully you can see this change. Purely from managing deer numbers, this landscape has become revegetated with Scots pine, our Christmas trees, my hook for this lecture. They're now 5 or 6 meters high, by willow, by alder, by a whole variety of tree species. And what I'm really interested in what are the feedbacks between the shape, the form of this river, how it flows, how it carries sediment, the actual size and width of this landscape, and how it changes with flood flows. And we get some really, really big flows when we get rainfall and snow events here in Glenfeshie. How is this landscape going to respond to this change in and reintroduction of wood into the landscape? So if we hike up a little bit higher and we look right down, we can also see it's not just on the valley floor, it's also some trees on the valley sides as well are becoming re-established. And there's quite a lot of active management of the pre-existing plantation forests. So we used a UAV, just like this one here. We fly these UAVs that can take pictures across the Feshie, both to obtain oblique images, like the ones that you see here, but we also take tens of thousands of photos across the landscape and join all those photos up to create both aerial images and also three-dimensional topographic models of the landscape. So here you can see both some of the older trees in the center of the picture, but also this recolonized river edge with all of these trees that are sort of between 5 and 10 meters high, following that regrowth over the last 20 years or so. Here, looking back down the river, we can see a similar, that river edge becoming recolonized with all of these small trees. And here we're going to just take a fly through this landscape. Not all of you will have seen a braided river before. Braided rivers at high flows, all of that gravelly area is covered in water. At low flows, here we are in the summer, I think we are here in June, water is quite constrained just to a smaller number of channels. We have quite a lot of active landsliding upstream in this catchment that delivers all of this sediment to the river. So you can see the river's relatively choked with sediment. It's quite steep and it can reorganize the positions of these channels every time there's a high flow event. We see quite rapid migration of those channels. So we have a master student, one of the co-authors of this presentation, Ewan, and one of our technicians, Craig. And Ewan's project is spending a year trying to answer this question. He's trying to quantify the patterns of riparian woodland establishment in the rewilding riverscape of the River Feshie. So I've had some students in their 3rd or 4th years of their geography degrees have joined us in some of the field work we've undertaken. Here, Ewan and his assistant are using a really accurate GPS, a bit like the GPS in your phones, but gets our accuracy down to 3 or 4 centimeters of our location on the Earth's surface. So we can geolocate and record exactly where a tree is growing. And then we're using quite a simple instrument, a staff here, to measure how high that individual tree is. So we're collecting some measurements from the ground of tree heights in order to investigate that question of exactly where a tree's re-establishing themselves, and then we'll go on to think about what are the consequences of that. Now, I showed you a drone. We often talk about these as consumer drones. You can buy these from a shop and fly these drones and acquire some images. We also have a slightly more sophisticated drone. This drone actually has a laser on it. It can collect tens of thousands of measurements every second to create a really detailed map of the Earth's surface by measuring the height and also measuring the structure of trees. So we can identify and process these data to create both a digital elevation model, as you see on the right-hand side here. This is essentially a topographic map. The different colors show the height of the Earth's topography. So you can see the three-dimensional structure of this river, and that's something a student's produced by processing this drone or UAV data. And we can also pull out point clouds. So all of those individual pulses create our X, Y, and Z, or three-dimensional measurements. Each one of those points that you see is from a tree. So on the left-hand side there, you've got a big Caledonian pine, and you can see its full height. On the right-hand side here, we've processed this point cloud to pull out the individual trees that are lining the sides of the river. So we're able to work at the moment so that we can automatically identify the species of the tree from its structure, and also map the height and therefore get an idea of the age of these trees. And we're interested in where are these trees growing in this riverscape? What does that mean for the health of this river? Are we going to, in the future, have a multi-thread river, a river that's as complex and got as much habitat diversity, or actually in this particular location in Glenfeshie, are those trees going to start squeezing that river down in terms of its size? We often talk about trees locking up carbon, and an estate in Scotland went on the market, I think last week. They'd spent about £2 million planting trees, I think, predominantly from the public purse. That estate is now being sold for £4 million more than it was sold for a couple of years ago, due to the value and the carbon credits locked up in that landscape. And landowners like Paulson can think about land management over decades or hundreds of years because of the investment opportunities that they have as rich individuals. Is that fair that the public purse is potentially paying for some of this replanting, but the benefits are being reaped by big business? There's lots of broader societal questions around the equity of some of the approaches to rewilding or revegetating our landscapes. So if we zoom out, if we look at a picture here, looking up Glenfeshie, if we look here at us extracting part of our point cloud, hopefully it's a little bit clearer than the previous image. We can see the shape of that large tree, and then we can see the shapes of those individual rewilding trees. And again, on the right-hand side, in orange and yellow, we're again pulling out those point clouds. So this is something, processing data sets like this is something that students may gain some experience of in the later stages of their degrees, depending on the options that you take here in Glasgow. And we're in a really exciting time for the technology that enables us to quantify the Earth's surface, and the technology and the computational promise of then trying to predict how the Earth's surface might change, not only including the interactions between water and sediment and wood, but also some of those societal choices that we make. So for me, wood has been a missing ingredient, and it's really exciting to be able to start to quantify the regrowth of wood here in Scotland. If we travel across to Norway, we can see similar experiments that started about 100 years ago, when many of the mountainscapes in Norway were quite bare, and we can now see a transformed riverscape in Norway. So it'll be interesting to see what our river futures are in a century's time here in Scotland. Just want to zoom out very broadly, and I often talk as a river scientist when people ask me about rivers, about how we understand them. And I think something that I've learned over the years is that every river is different. We need to characterize rivers based on observations of those rivers, either by visiting those landscapes, by looking at satellite data, by acquiring topographic data, as we have done from UAVs. If we're interested in nature-based solutions, what actions can we take to give rivers space to let them self-heal? And I think the River Feshie example is a really interesting example of where we've removed deers from the landscape, and by removing deer, the river, the landscape is regenerating itself. It's not costing more than the cost of managing those deer numbers. So it's a very interesting nature-based service for potentially changing a landscape, for locking up carbon in that landscape, potentially for increasing habitat diversity. How do we give rivers voice? Rivers are non-human innately. If we travel to somewhere like New Zealand, some rivers now have legally bound rights. They have actually found their own voice. Can we use data to give rivers a voice? And we do a lot of work in the Philippines at the moment. We use satellite imagery to look at how rivers are changing. Those changes, those animations that we obtain from satellite imagery, enables rivers to actually have a voice for what they need and what their diet should be to sustain themselves. So what do we need to maintain diverse habitats, like the one you might see in the picture here? We need rivers to be able to move sediment, deposit sediment. We need water. We don't want our water trapped behind large impoundments. We need vegetation. We need vegetation that's growing, and in the long term, we need wood. This picture of the Feshi doesn't have any large wood in it yet. We've got wood growing on the side. It's going to take over a century before we get lots of tree trunks dotted along that landscape from the erosion and deposition of wood. Lots of our rivers we sometimes talk about as zombies. They're hemmed in on either side by flood or bank erosion defences. We don't get as much diversity. This river's hardly got any water flowing through it. I'd advocate that we need to think about the health of rivers and try and avoid turning our riverscapes into zombies. And in many places, we want to think about how we can carefully reverse some of these impacts. So we want to think about rivers and how they can be resilient natural infrastructure. Can the growth of these Christmas-like trees in Glen Feshi enable ecosystems to thrive? Can they slow the wave of floodwater down to the River Spey? Can they help us to adapt to climate change impacts? And over what scales might those impacts be realised? We might be able to absorb more water over the next few decades or the next century, but is the actual niche for Caledonian pines, for Scots pines, still going to be there in 100 to 200 years? Some of the modelling work that I've read actually indicates that with changes in climate and the rate at which seeds are produced by these trees, some of these trees may no longer actually be able to thrive on the floor of the Feshi in 100 or 200 years. Do we need to actually think forward about how we can help the manufacture, the anthropogenic manufacture of these rewilding landscapes so that they are sustainable over the next 100 or so years? So I hope I've given you a bit of introduction to some of our contemporary thinking in river science, and I've also tried to give you a little bit of a perspective on how I've understood one landscape here in Scotland over the last 20 years or so, and also shown you what some students, the type of work they might get involved in later in their degrees, or also at a master's level. If you want to know more, there's some quite good non-fiction books out there on rewilding, on beavers, on the tree line. Specifically, the tree line has a chapter in it about Glen Feshi, and Big Picture Scotland also have quite a nice glossy book looking at a number of different places in Scotland and their journeys through rewilding. There are two movies out there. Riverwoods is openly available on Channel 5 and talks about the interaction between salmon and the crisis in salmon and how that links to river health here in Scotland. And you might also be interested, you can arrange a free viewing. You just need to register to watch Why Not Scotland, which reflects upon the rewilding journey here in Scotland and comparing it to the rewilding journey of some of our neighbouring countries in Europe. So, happy Christmas, everyone, and thanks for coming along to the talk today.
Fantastic. So what I'm just going to do is bring out, hopefully, yeah, it's still in here. So You're very welcome to ask questions verbally. I'm going to send Duncan around with a roving mic if you'd like to ask one out loud. If you'd prefer to drop something in the Mentimeter, we can pick ones up from there as well. Okay. So it's the same Mentimeter link that you had before. So I'll bring that up so we see whether anyone's got any questions coming in.
And I'm now freed from having to be near the keyboard and microphone, so I can get a little bit closer to you and see you. Please do ask any question. Have a guess at a question. Just think of anything you want to ask. I'm happy to try answering anything. I've got other colleagues in the room that I can also deflect questions towards if I don't have the expertise to answer them. So please do think about anything you might want to ask me or one of my colleagues.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned like a lot of the trees growing and the stability that gives the kind of the like geomorphic effect of it. What is the effect of like leaves going into the river that trees, like riparian trees, kind of would obviously deposit, which wouldn't be there if trees weren't there?
Yep. So really great question. I think you're introducing organic material back into that system. You're providing foodstuffs. You're potentially locking up some of that material into the river as well. It's very similar to some extent salmon. Dead salmon are actually quite important for the nutrients that are available in a river as well. You're just increasing that complexity of foodstuffs and biogeochemical processes within the river system. Of course, in some of those movies, you saw evergreen trees like the Scots pine or Caledonian pine. You're also in those rewilding landscapes getting willow and birch species, for example, which of course are deciduous and introducing that leaf litter. Also really important for soil. In those valley floors as well, and potentially quite a transformation in the ground floor habitat. Capercaillies, a bird, were already in the Feshie, but their numbers are believed. The habitat is improving within the riverscape of the Feshie, which is great. So we're starting to see that return on biodiversity.
So we've got a couple of questions come through on Mentimeter, so I can probably answer the first one because it relates to first and second year. So we had a question, what kinds of fieldwork do students do in first and second year? Some of our student speakers are also going to talk to this in a little bit, but in first year geography, you do some lab-based fieldwork down in Kelvingrove Park and around the west end of Glasgow. So in first semester, you do some work about water quality, air quality, and carbon sequestration in the park, getting to use some kit and getting to work in research groups. In first year earth science, you do some day trips, go across to Holyrood Park in Edinburgh to get a kind of whole landscape overview, but right down to mineralogical information about the volcanic history and the long-term landscape history over there. And we also go in second semester to Victoria Park near Whiteinch to look at the fossilised trees that are in the kind of quarry garden there. When we get into second year, if you're doing geography, I'll have a residential field class at the end of second year that is UK based. So at the minute we go to Inverness and you do human, physical and environmental geography projects, all based out of, we go and stay in the youth hostel there and then we bus you around the area. If you are doing earth science, then you would go to Fife and we stay in a big massive caravan park on the coast and then take day trips out from there. But I'll let our students speak a little bit more to the field trips going forward. So then, Richard, what simple thing can an ordinary person do about the loss of trees from the environment?
Yep, and I'll just step back one question very briefly. I'm one of the members of staff that go on the Inverness field trip, and we visit, most students rotate through a number of different sites. Some students are interested in river science, spend time at a river restoration site on the River Nairn. A company I work with, Seabeck Eco-Engineering, re-meandered this river, and students, during the couple of days that they're out, measure how the sediments changed and contribute to a long-term archive on sediment change. They measure the flow in the river. They fly drones and take pictures and think about how they can characterize that changing landscape. But the actual question I'm meant to be answering is what can an ordinary person do about the loss of trees from the environment? I guess one thing, we're all consumers. We can choose how we consume, and there are we can use that consumption to target organisations or companies that might be more eco-aware. So that might be one thing we can do. There are volunteering opportunities. I know some of our undergraduate students have actually spent time with some of the organisations up in the Cairngorms, planting trees, monitoring rewilding, and have done those types of things. I think here in Glasgow, I'm part of a research project Gallant, and there's quite a lot of initiatives around how we manage our riverscapes and the health of our rivers here in Scotland. And again, there's opportunities to get involved, to think about where trees can be planted and how trees can become part of our city scapes. If you do have a back garden, if you're lucky enough to have some space, how can you actually use that space as well? Rewilding doesn't need to happen at the catchment scale. It can happen at the park scale. Part of our estate here on campus is being managed in more of a rewilding form. The grass isn't cut. The grass is allowed to grow much higher. It's not rewilding in the scale of the experiment in the Fesci, but it potentially makes quite a difference to the ecology compared to the striped lawns that we had before in parts of campus. Does anyone else want to add anything to that answer?
I'll just let you go, Richard. Do you want to handle, I'm just conscious of your time because I know you need to get away. Do you want to just handle the final one? What river animals benefit the most from rewilding? I think
I'm going to talk about the salmon, I think. Salmon is a key indicator species here in Scotland. We have a real crisis in salmon numbers. I think 30% of salmon used to return to the sea. Only 3% of salmon are now getting back to the sea. There's an interconnected challenge between what's happening in our oceans and what's happening in our rivers and what's happening inland as well. Potentially providing a diverse habitat for salmon is such an important indicator species for everything else that lives in our rivers. If we can improve our habitats, the depth of our pools, if we can increase the shade along our rivers to reduce water temperatures. Once water temperatures get much above the mid-20 degrees Celsius, some of the younger salmon in their earlier life stages just can't survive anymore. And many of our Scottish rivers during summer months are literally starting to boil. Well, not boil literally, but they're getting too hot for some of the fish that actually live in those rivers. So by shading our river corridors, potentially we can change and bring back down those river temperatures. So as an iconic species, I think salmon probably is, if salmon starts to benefit from rewilding, so many other species will as well. Oh, there is one. Yeah, so I'll give you one story here. I have stayed in a number of different holiday properties and cottages when we've been doing field work around Glen Fesci or even in Glen Fesci. I remember one landowner talking about the demise of deer and stags, and they used to really enjoy seeing that wildlife travelling through their property. It was one of the reasons they'd lived there. There's a famous picture drawn of a stag in Glen Fesci. So there is a change to that link between people and nature, potentially from changing those habitats, which can have a very real change in terms of people's sense of place. Should lynx or wolves be reintroduced? Those are really contemporary, kind of live questions that can create quite a lot of fear amongst some people and the potential impacts on their livelihoods, and investigating whether those are real impacts or how things might play out is really important. And a lot comes down to the way that people that have rewilding visions work with communities, where those projects are a success or not. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I have to move on to another commitment this afternoon, so I'm afraid I can't be with you for any longer, but you're in great hands. Do explore and ask lots of questions of my colleagues, both staff colleagues and student colleagues, and enjoy the rest of your day here at the university. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much back to me with my dropping mic. Let's get you on here. Doesn't like dresses. Something. Okay, so thanks to Richard. We're now going to segue into some presentations from our students. But before that, what I was just going to do was give you a very brief outline or reminder of the degrees that we're offering, just so that it prompts you in case you want to come and ask any questions at the end. So here at Glasgow, we offer 3 undergraduate programs, and our students will speak a little bit to this in a minute, which will give you more of a feeling of what those degrees are actually like. So we've got geography, which you can enter through 3 different pathways, through 3 different colleges. We've got environmental geoscience and geology. And so I'll not go through all the detail here, but hopefully what you can pick out is perhaps topics that you've been enjoying at school, ways that you like to work, problems that you're interested in, and see how they might map against our degrees here. The only other point that I wanted to make is just that it is important, if you're thinking about geography, to think about what college you're applying through, because first of all, there's a difference in entry requirements with the different colleges, and because in Scotland we have our 4-year structure to our degrees, in your first year, if you're studying for a geography degree, you won't only be studying geography, you'll be doing 2 other subjects at least alongside. So the college that you come in through makes a big difference as to what subjects you can take alongside. So if you're more on the art side of things, and you think you might want to take things like English, languages, philosophy, etc. You want to come in through the College of Arts to allow that to happen. If you're more into things like politics, economics, you want to come in through social science. And if you want to keep your sciences on, then you want to come in through the College of Science and Engineering. It sounds kind of logical, but it makes a big difference once you're actually in, and it can make a difference in terms of what subjects you've got now and the grades that you've got. Okay, but come and speak to me about that at the end if you've got any queries. Okay, so I'd like to pass over to our students just now, and we'll start with Duncan, who's one of our current geography students.
Hello. Cool. Hi, yeah, so I'm Duncan. I'm a 4th-year geography student, and I'll give you a bit of information / pictures about the student experience as a geographer in Glasgow. So let's go. Here we are. So this is the East Quad. This is where a lot of geography, this kind of row here is where a lot of geography is based. So if you do geography, you'll get to go into the main building quite a lot, which is quite exciting to some people. And then some of the other stuff is in the Malema, which is a slightly more modern building. So with geography, obviously, a big thing is the divide between human and physical geography. If you do a geography degree at Glasgow, you kind of get the opportunity to do both human and physical, and a kind of combination of both, which is sort of called environmental geography. So here's these are some honours courses that you will have the option to take as long as they don't change. And you kind of see there's really stuff from like quite sciencey, like oceanography, to quite like sort of humanities, like historical stuff, social science, like politics, black geographies, kind of urban. It covers so much. So literally like anything you might be interested in, geography probably does cover. And then, so now talking about field trips. Field trips are quite a big draw for a lot of people, I think. It's definitely a reason a factor that I took into account when choosing where to go, what to do. So in geography, you of course get lots of field trips, lots of opportunities to go away. Here's kind of some of them. I've got some pictures later on, but you've got your core courses where you have to do these field trips. So you could go for everything from Kelvin Grove for urban ecology to Inverness to a bit further afield in Majorca. And then you also, in some of the optional honours courses, will get opportunities to go to other places depending on what you choose. And obviously, your field work for your dissertation, eventually you may choose to do a field-based dissertation where you can effectively go wherever you want. But yeah, so the Inverness field trip is at the end of second year, so it's kind of March, April time in second year. And you go up to Inverness and you have a chance to do all sorts of field work, both human and physical. Everyone does everything kind of thing at that stage. So yeah, you kind of do everything from soil. There's some river stuff that kind of Richard was to do with. There's us all looking quite cold and wet. There's quite a lot of cold and wet, but there's also sunny and warm, which in Majorca it was slightly more sunny and warm. So, and this is your third year field course, and at that point you've sort of started to choose what you're more interested in geography a lot more, so you can specialise on a project. So these are obviously pictures from me. So we specialised on coastal vegetation in Majorca and seagrass. So a lot of kind of quadrat stuff, measuring vegetation, recording the kind of topography of the beach. But there was also people who did stuff on tourism in Majorca, other things on like the literary landscapes of Majorca. So it really emphasizes the fact that you can do so much in geography. And obviously, yeah, that was where we were staying. The hotel was quite nice. We got lots of nice food and everything. Definitely a pool. So yeah, Majorca was really great. And you really, at that point, start to bond quite a lot with the people in your course, which is another thing about geography and field trips. You like really get to know the people in your course compared to other subjects where, from what I've heard, there's less of that. So then the final kind of field work that you may do, probably will do, but might not, is for your dissertation. And this is as specialised as it gets. So in second year in Inverness, you kind of do everything in the field trip. Majorca, it's a bit more like you can choose a bit, but there's still, you're sort of told what you need to do, and you're in a group. This is exactly what you want to do. So I went up to the Cairngorms, similar to what Richard was talking about, and I was recording trees. I was taking soil samples, taking this GPS, taking the position of trees. Up in the top left there's the soil CO2 emission recording there. So this, again, was very nice. We got nice weather, we got less nice weather, but that's your opportunity to really go where you want to go, do exactly what you want to do, and really hone your skills on your specific interest. And that's something that geography lets you do with your dissertation, like a lot of specialization. So more on the kind of social side, there's a geography society, GeogSoc, which a lot of people who end up doing geography will join, do kind of all sorts of stuff from pub, a lot of pub-related stuff, to be fair, like pub crawls and stuff. But we also do balls, Cayleys. Here's the Cayley last year. So like lots of social stuff, beach cleans, which that was taken from a beach clean, the sand thing. And there's also fairly newly, or renewly, a magazine called The Drumlin, which is the geography department / geography and earth science department magazine, which has been running for decades, which if you come, you might, and it's still around, you might have a chance to write in and get involved in. So then more on the kind of academic side, so field stuff, social stuff, all very exciting. This is the more day-to-day stuff. You'll have kind of various different types of teaching. Most of it will be either in the form of lectures, labs, tutorials, if it's not in the field. And yeah, this kind of is vaguely what the different types of teaching, like how they're kind of laid out. But I think the important thing to stress is there's a lot of different types of teaching that goes on. And whether you're like more into your lectures, you like just sitting and listening to someone chat, or if you're kind of like to be more engaged in chatting, discussing ideas, getting hands-on in the labs and stuff, there's definitely, yeah, you get a real range of experiences with this. And obviously you can interact with your peers to varying extents in these in tutorials, a lot of chat, same with labs, less on lectures. But I think geography is quite good in that there is a lot of opportunity to interact with the other people in your course, either in the field, or in labs and tutorials. Oh yeah, so the dissertation obviously, for me was a big draw when choosing whether or not to do environmental geoscience or geography. And with the dissertation, you, as I said earlier, really can do exactly what you want to do. So this is my one here, which I handed in today, which is quite exciting. And like I could do this is quite a specific title, could do exactly what I wanted to do. So from the start to the end, you get the whole research process, which obviously if you're interested in academia is very interesting. Even if you're not, still very interesting. And obviously you're supported by a supervisor the whole way. So if you have any questions about the topic of this dissertation, feel free to ask them of me. There's a physical copy there if you're interested. But yeah, I think that's a really important point to make with geography, is the dissertation is very customizable. So yeah, that's kind of all I have to say on the geography side. These are reasons you should do geography at Glasgow. Yeah.
We'll save your questions to the end.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you, Duncan. Fab. So we're going to save the questions once all the student presenters have spoken, so you can kind of group them in together. But what I will say is I'll just advance the slide so that if you're thinking of questions as we go, you can keep adding them in the Mentimeter, okay? Okay, so I'd like to invite Jess up. She's already on her way, which is great. Fantastic. Hope you can clip it on better than me.
Hi, I'm Jess. I'm a fourth year geology student. It's a bit about life just being at uni. So I've got an example timetable up for earth sciences. So level one's just up the top, and you'll have like an hour lecture, maybe 2 hour labs a couple of times a week. And then when you get to honours, it sort of turns into 3-hour sessions, which sounds like an absolute nightmare, but it's not. So you'll have maybe like an hour's lecture, and then we'll go off to Greg's for a break. So for like a 15-20 minute break, and then you come back and do a lab, and it's just sort of like a really chilled lab, like the lecturer will be wandering around, and you could just get on with it at your own pace. I've got some photos of samples we've got. So we've got a really cool folded sample there, and then we've also got some microscopy here that was taken in 3rd year, I think. As for student resources, you've got the library where you get some really nice views of the main building. We've got the GMS, which you're in, which is a massive study space, and we've just got a new Adam Smith building opened, and the Claris Piers, and I think there's another one as well, I think it's the ARC. We also have the Students' Representative Council, the SRC, who handle like class reps. So if you've got a problem in your class, you can go speak to them. And we've also got the John Smith's bookshop in the Fraser building. So if you want like university books that are a little bit cheaper, you can always just pop into there and get them. Oh, and that's a video. As for field trips with geology, we get some pretty amazing ones. So the first picture here was taken at Ely in Fife, so that's where you go in 2nd year. So you get some really stunning views. We've got this one up in Durness. Our lecturer Ian made sure we had a stop at some Loch-Inver pies during the trip, and we also finished the trip with a hot chocolate from Cocoa Mountain. And we've got Glen Cove just near my head here. As for extracurricular activities, we've got, as Duncan said, you've got the Drumlin magazine, which you can get involved in. We've also got Goosa, who's got like hundreds and hundreds of sports clubs, and you've also got the society ones as well, like Geography Society, GESOC, which is Earth Science Society. I'm also a part of Highland Dance Society, There's something for everyone. There's like baking, just whatever you like. As for the social life of uni, we've got our guest doc Kaylee that we had a couple of weeks ago. There's also like different brunchy spots in the West End, so I think that's a brunch club. And then there's also Hive Thursdays, which everyone ends up at Hive. As for study abroad, there's so many options. So this is just a screenshot taken from the university website. I think this is for earth science, and geography is pretty similar. There's so many places to choose from. And as for the whole university, I think there's over 150 partner universities. So if study abroad is something you're really interested in, then definitely give it a look, because you can literally go everywhere. And if you'd like to follow the school just to sort of get like an insight into what student life is like, we've got an Instagram and a TikTok, which I feature in both quite a lot. So you can just sort of see what student life is actually like from a student's perspective.
We're just going to bring Ben up now for the last student perspective, and then you'll have a chance to ask and answer any of your questions to our students then.
Hello? Sweet. Okay. My name's Ben. I'm a fourth year geologist, same as Jess. I'm president and founder of Earth Sciences Society, which I started in September 2023 because we didn't have one, and I thought that we needed one. So that's us there. So Instagram as well. But who are we? So we're all geologists and environmental geoscientists, mainly. Geography obviously have their society as well, but I thought that we needed some representation and some, our own things to do. So that was October. Oh, sorry. We've done residential field trips, of course. Jess has touched on that, as Jess right now. The one on the right, I think, is up in Ullapool. The residential field trips, similar to geography, are like the best bit about your degree. It's you go away for a week with your mates, sitting in a caravan or youth hostel, whatever it is, work during the day, have big fires in the evening, some drinks as well. It's all, I think that's fine. In March, we actually won New Society of the Year, which is pretty cool. We got £100 of funding for that. So we bought loads of fleeces, basically. But yeah, it was really cool. Didn't expect to win at all. But yeah, really happy to do that. We also did a charity event, ran the length of the Clyde in a week for Glasgow Women's Aid, raised £300, which was not bad. And then that takes us on to sort of this year. Then into uni, Geoscience and Social, which was the first one we've ever done. So Glasgow, Edinburgh, St Andrews. Went up to Edinburgh at the Halloween, did some fun challenges. It was really good to meet people that also study your subject, but at other unis, which is cool. Also did some pub golf, similar to geography, lots of pub-related activities. Really good fun.